Happy birthday, Redeemer. We have been meeting for 5 years now, and we wanted to capture our story on video to celebrate all that God has done in and through us. Our hope is that by capturing this, it will build a sense of faith and expectation for all that God will do in the future. So let's start right at the beginning of the story. The Redeemer story doesn't begin in Colchester. Actually, it began in about 2014 when Claire and I were based down in Kent, where I was on the leadership of the City Church, which was a multi-site church across Canterbury and Whitstable. A few years before the beginnings of Colchester began, we had moved from Canterbury to Whitstable to plant and take on the leadership of their first multi-site there in 2011. And it was in 2014 when we were first asked to consider whether we would move to Colchester and take on the leadership of the church there. At that time, Claire was pregnant with our seconds. We loved what we were doing, and we felt responsible for the church in Whitstable. And so we were quite quick to say no. But as God does, he continued to pursue us and speak to us through various bits of wisdom from other people and through prophetic input and a sense of personal guiding. We began to realize that God was probably speaking to us, but we did love where we were, and so we were a bit resistant to it, I think it would be fair to say. And so we set aside a day because we knew we had to make a decision because the church there were encouraging us to go and Colchester was waiting, and we knew we had to make a decision. So we set a day aside where we planned to go through all the prophetic words that we had and spend some time praying and try to come to some form of decision making. I don't know what your recollection was of kind of the lead up to that.
Yeah, I think it certainly wasn't expected that we'd be asked to do something like this at the time. We can honestly say it wasn't our timing, and so we were saying no to start off with. But as we came to sit down and talk about it, we found it was just obvious that God was trying to get our attention, and there was just certain things that we couldn't ignore. So we felt compelled that actually this was something God was calling us to do.
Yeah, I remember that day we set aside this time, and after it took about 10 minutes just to share the journey so far and all the bits of wisdom we'd had and prophetic words. And Claire looked at me and she said, "So what do you think we should do?" And I think my response was, "I don't think we have a choice. We have to go." At which point Claire suddenly needed the toilet. And so she went upstairs. And I think she would recall now and saying that was the first time there was like a skip in your step. Something changed in our hearts in that moment of us saying yes, even in our hearts. We got excited, I think, in a new way for it for the first time, and faith rose in our hearts. Is that a fair kind of reflection of how you felt?
Yeah, definitely. I think so, moving upstairs and coming back down, God just kind of changed my heart and confirmed that yes, what we were thinking was right. So yeah.
From there, it was just moving forward from that point. So we said yes. We tried to responsibly, with our local church leadership, hand over a church we loved and we cared for deeply, but with a growing excitement. We moved in 2015, April 2015, to Colchester. We moved into our first home. We rented somewhere. We had to rent months before we arrived so that the children could get school places. And the adventure began with us basically around the middle of 2015. Partnering with Relational Mission, with particular support from Maurice Nightingale and Tom Shaw and the team at the City Church in Canterbury, who were our sending church, we arrived in Colchester and others began to join us. Mike Luwad moved up from Eastbourne. Ben and Mika Parker joined us from Canterbury. And then our first students joined us. Mark Hihiko from Attleborough, Rianne Dalrymple, Amy Hawkins and Sammy Miller joined us from Peterborough. The Tarr family and the McDonalds were based locally and they also joined us. So we're going to hear from them what it was like in the early days.
Well, I remember the excitement of the early days of being Redeemer Church here in Colchester. It was great to be with people in each other's homes, to eat together, to play games, to have fun, to pray, to look at God's Word. Fabulous times of just building new relationships with new people. I really enjoyed that, and obviously that's grown since then. So what a fabulous start it was, and exciting to have a great emphasis on relationships and getting to know one another and growing in God together.
Right at the beginning, it was really exciting. There was a lot of things changing, a lot of new people arriving, and just a lot of things going on that were really exciting and interesting. And it was such a small, close group of people that everything that was happening, we were all sort of doing together.
5 years ago, we were a much smaller community, able to fit in a sizable living room together and really get to know one another really well.
Early days at Redeemer were so exciting, lots of fun. It felt like we were on a big adventure.
I loved that early community stage. I think from that we've seen a lot of the culture that we hold dear at Redeemer. It came from those early days spent in each other's homes.
Friendship, adventure, and a whole lot of fun.
It was a really great community and it felt like a family.
Hard work and lots of excitement.
Fun.
Really fun.
Exciting, adventurous, and a great joy.
So those were the very early days of Redeemer. And in the coming years, from about 2016, we started to see steady growth in both the depth and the breadth of church life.
In 2016, we started to gather together midweek as well as on Sundays in people's homes around Colchester. Fabulous times getting to know one another and new people who had just arrived in Colchester to serve with us. In May 2016, we then moved to the Bellevue Social Club. We had red and green velvet seats in the social area, and our kids also held their meetings in there. When we had our main meetings together as adults, we were in this room with no windows, and it was a rather interesting place, but the atmosphere and the presence of God was so strong among us. It was fantastic. Everybody was pulling together, serving with set up and set down and leading worship and preaching, you name it. Everybody was chipping in to make sure that this exciting new adventure would go well. And then we even managed to fit in a little mission trip to Lille in northern France to visit some friends there who are church planting in the relational mission family. That was fantastic to give us a bigger view of what God's doing even beyond Colchester. Exciting times with people pulling together and seeing God at work among us.
In 2017 was a year of strengthening, multiplying and maturing. We began developing teams that could carry all that God was calling us to steward. Our midweek groups were multiplying. We established a leadership team. And because many of our students and others would be moving on for jobs and things like that, we began developing our capacity for sending. We were deliberate and purposeful about equipping those who'd move on, so nobody ever left. They were always sent well. One of the beautiful things that God began doing, and was very obvious, was he was gathering a beautiful diversity of people in terms of background and gifting. And it was a really exciting time seeking to develop unity amidst that diversity. We began preaching on the foundations of the church and on God's heart towards his church and what it meant to be a radically different community, the people of God in the world, but not of the world. We quickly realised that Bellevue, our first public home as it were, although fantastic and we were hugely fond of it, wasn't going to serve us in terms of what God was calling us to for the next season. So we began looking around all of Colchester for a new place to call home. And in 2017, we moved towards developing an eldership team.
In 2018, we moved out of the building where we had been gathering, which was a cosy and pleasant in some ways place, but it was slightly off the beaten track. It was not quite ideal for what we wanted to do. So we moved to the place where we currently meet, which is a lot more open, airy, spacious, and it's also more visible. So we've had people who've seen that something is going on here at church and have just walked in to find out what's happened. Over the years, God has also added lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds. And some of those have been really well-equipped believers, people who've been able to join us and labour alongside us. Others are people who've drifted from God at some point in the past and come back and encountered him again, which is great to see. We've tried to establish some good foundations over the past few years. We have an eldership team of myself, Hugh, Tom, Al, and that helps to bring a little bit of shape and structure to what we do. And we feel God has really been blessing us and giving us favour, so we have faith for new things to grow. Mika, my lovely wife, started working for the church, doing a lot of administrative things, but helping to build our student work, where God had blessed us with a large number of students. So it's been really exciting to see these foundations that we've been able to lay and where God has blessed us through them.
So with a sense of momentum and favour and blessing, we've continued to press on in faith and obedience, anticipating that God has so much more to do in us and through us. Even with the lockdown and the pandemic, we've seen a multiplication and a maturing in church life. With much more going online, we've seen people coming to faith for the first time, partly through Redeemer, and we've seen others becoming aware of their need for God and His help and salvation more than ever before, returning to the faith. What was hugely encouraging is rather than less engagement during the lockdown, there was more, particularly in our life group life. This was a huge sign that us being a real family was genuinely the case, as people looked to each other for support and encouragement in their walk with Christ. And so as we look to the future, we trust that sharing the story has fueled your faith. And if you've been part of the journey, whether you've just started it by watching this video, thank you. Thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for all that you've given to Redeemer Life. And let's continue to press on in faith together to the glory of God as we help people discover life in Jesus, fullness of life, by helping them find and follow Him. Thank you.